And welcome. There we go. That's the trigger's been pulled on it now that we know that the meeting's been being recorded. And with that, I'll begin. I certainly appreciate seeing so many names that I recognize from the plumbing industry that are on our attendee list. So hopefully everybody will find this of some interest, and hopefully some of this information's already come across your screens or through different associations and etc. So we've taken the core document from NRC that kind of brought out the top 10 items within the National Plumbing Code, and we've updated it so that we can try to consider the lion's share of the proposed changes within the plumbing code. And so we'll start right at the beginning. The code was published on March 28th of 2022, and there's a bit of a challenge with that because that is a ways beyond 2020 to be able to recognize it as the 2020 plumbing code, but it still holds that date. So automatic code adoption brings that into force on April 1st of 2023. So that date has just recently passed, but we have that information available for us. And there is a notice on our website indicating the day that it comes into force, because you don't find it anywhere else. It's not actually in the code or in the current regulation. Only the notice that supports the automatic code adoption through the Safety Codes Act would be able to assist that. So there's a picture of it. It's not too hard to find anymore between printings and free for view access. But, you know, as tradesmen and safety codes officers, we often find a challenge with making sure that the code information is getting in front of people. But it is available. It is available for free. And that there is actually a degree of availability to be able to print off that information. So for homeowners and for others that may not have historically had access to it, we've got that. Get that out there to be able to support the industry. The 2020 sets out the technical requirements, as it says here, for the design and installation. We won't be going through all of them because one technical code change is going to actually create a potential of 5 or 10 different recognized amendments within the code. If it's a reference standard, that shows up in tables and in front matter, as well as in the prescriptive clauses. So we'll be trying to go through the highlights, and we'll be trying not to bounce back and forth too far. NRC give us this presentation template to identify those significant proposed changes. And with that, we've followed that in principle with the seismicity, piping, potable, non-potable, and new materials. So that does create some challenges within the structure of the presentation that you can't start at the front of the code book and go through it page by page. There's a little bit of hunting to follow this template that was given to us. So we'll be working along those 4 categories. The first of it for today is going to be seismicity. And in principle for Alberta, this is a relatively small change. Hopefully we don't get any earthquakes that create challenges for us. But with that, there was a number of changes within the National Building Code. And those items created a domino that said that the plumbing code needs to be able to do the same thing as well. How do we make sure that as these buildings are moving, if we're concerned at keeping it up or keeping it safe for people to be able to get out of a building in an event, then how do we make sure that we manage the piping system? So for us in the plumbing, it's about how we hold it up and how we maintain those restraints as necessary. So there are some prescriptive requirements, but these bounce back and forth. So it's going to take a bit before different contractors will develop a comfort to know that this is what the plumbing code says regarding seismic design with restraints and those conditions, but that it essentially sends you to the building code, says, well, go to the building code, find out what the requirements are, and make sure you meet those minimum requirements as they are identified. So this small statement actually has a fairly significant impact, and certainly for commercial and industrial applications, we're going to see more of these types of installations where somebody's providing evidence that they've looked at the building code and had those evaluate or the requirements incorporated within the plumbing system. Again, that's often going to be a challenge that falls to the professional of record. But in the event that you don't have one, it's important to be mindful as a safety codes officer that these things are being considered. So again, here's some additional points within the National Building Code, and the Alberta edition again, following the prescriptive requirements under 41818. And so those, again, it's about taking that one new clause within the plumbing code and being able to make sure all of the applicable parts within the National Building Code are considered. So that was a fairly simple system there. We're a quarter done. And sorry to let you down, that's kind of not how this goes. So that was the smaller one. So we're looking at piping and transferring systems. And although I've been talking about this for years, it's really about a shift away from acronyms and hard and soft conversions back to some of the rule of thumb approaches that we have. And so because we've got an industry that knows what a 2-inch pipe is and a 3-inch pipe is, the committee agreed that let's no longer fight over what a 2-inch pipe is in metric or what a 3-inch pipe is in metric. Let's focus on really hard metric conversions when we have a specific measurement of length that we need to be able to manage, a radius, those types of things. Let's get out of the business of trying to figure out what an actual pipe diameter is as we convert it from metric to, or from British to metric. And so this is a really significant change, although it makes a lot of sense to most of us, that now I can say a 2-inch pipe is a 2-inch pipe. I don't have to fight with somebody what the metric equivalent is, or don't have to do anything like that. So this recognition of NPS throughout the code has created this separation of critical measurements that we want to be able to make sure we have a metric measurement and a British equivalent, and get out of the things that we don't. So again, NPS is littered throughout the code. So there's actually a couple hundred applications where this comes into play, but it's all the same thing. It was about the industry may be confused because as we bring out a new PEX or a new stainless steel, etc., what are we doing with the conventions of NPS or nominal pipe size versus what the standard requires for actual measurements? And so we're going to be mindful of this as the industry continues to grow, to watch a 1/2-inch pipe that has a tiny hole in it versus a 1/2-inch pipe that has a big hole in it. Still going to be a bit of a problem with us. So we'll have to watch that. And it's about making sure that the piping manufacturer that's meeting the standard is satisfying the prescriptive requirements of the codes and tables as necessary for their particular pipe. And so that has to do with, different expectations about pressures and velocities when we're trying to make sure these pipes will last for a reasonable lifetime. So with that one, it'll come up again in this presentation, and it should, but we won't focus on it as it'll impact different clauses and requirements as we go through it. So again, this new definition of NPS, measuring that nominal diameter and not applying particularly to the hard and soft conversions or the other expectations we have throughout the body of the code. Okay, with that, use of copper tube on urinals. And so we've, throughout our careers, we've had different challenges where we've learned that you can't have urine sitting in copper urinals for any length of time. Even the vent piping can be a problem with that. And then new technology came along regarding flushing and etc. With this version of the code, the standing committee said, doesn't matter whether you flush it, whether it's automatic, whether you're really good at maintenance or not, no more copper. There just isn't enough evidence that we can keep those systems structurally intact. So the code now prohibits the use of copper for that portion of the vent pipe below the flood level rim of the urinal and the drainage as it applies to that. Regardless of what type of urinal it may be, whether it's manual or automatic, etc. And with that, we'll move on to the neutralizing tanks. This has some broad language within the code, but also make sure you get in and have a look at the notes pages regarding neutralization tanks, because it covers a fairly broad range regarding, are we neutralizing a reasonable process like a condensing appliance, like a furnace, or are we dealing with caustic chemicals that have far-reaching implications regarding the probability of impact within that, whether that be through pH and whether it's through other potential interaction with these chemicals. So there's new requirements, and this presentation will focus on the separation of that venting system, so we're not potentially creating a corrosive environment and or potentially doing damage with an existing venting system or with a traditional plumbing vent system, but we're separating it to the outside air and managing some sizing requirements, as well as this intent to help prevent those failures. Now, one of the things that these neutralization tanks do while we're trying to manage the pH level is the ability to be flexible. Are we simply diluting a component to be able to manage pH, or chemical neutralization? And those types of things are going to need to be considered with the range of possibilities. Now, not least of all, many of you know that these neutralization tanks may be quite small and inside a facility, or they may be really large and out in a parking lot. So depending upon what the facility is and how they do that, it adds challenges for how they're connected and how they're drained. Similarly, how they're vented regarding whether they're inside or outside. Now, further on to some prescriptive requirements of the neutralizing tanks. So here's a couple of code clauses actually out of the code. This information is available for you to go back to have a look at regarding the venting of that drain piping, recognizing that we've already got quite a bit of this language within the code, but by adding neutralizing tanks in there, there was the ability to make sure that we're clarifying which components need to be considered under these additional prescriptive requirements. Also, too, another set of requirements for vents of sumps, and now adding neutralizing and dilution tanks in there. But it also traditionally impacts macerating toilets that really isn't that old for us. There isn't that many of them out there, and we've only had one other code cycle with macerating toilets in there to be able to manage some of the risks that fall within those types of application. Now, switching from there to protection from backflow, this is one of mine that's fun. It comes down to gate valves and screw caps, which require manual intervention, are no longer acceptable within the requirement of the code. So when we look at this type of an issue, In the old days, and I hate to say the old days because it may not apply to us all, but there was a time where socially we had a much higher percentage of people who lived at home, whether they were stay-at-home families, that mothers or fathers with kids. And so there was a much higher percentage of people living in homes to be able to say something's going on, the sewer's backing up, to be able to go down and put a plug in, or to have a process and a manual intervention to shut a valve off, to be able to put a screw cap in. And that the standing committee came to the agreement after Alberta said this is no longer acceptable 10 years ago. And then 5 years ago, through automatic code adoption, we needed to realign with the national committee and say, you can do it. So used to be you could use a screw cap or a valve, and then you couldn't use a screw cap or a valve, and then you could use a screw cap and a valve, and now you cannot use a screw cap or a valve. Doesn't mean there isn't possibilities for putting in a valve or putting in a screw cap to be able to address some of the challenges that may be out there, but it doesn't satisfy the backflow protection requirements. We need to consider normally open, normally closed backwater valves as applicable for the various parts of the plumbing system as required. And then for jurisdictions that say, we know when a flood's coming, we want to put a valve in there, that's reasonable to put in as an additional or a secondary level of protection, and may need to be considered on a case-by-case basis or a municipality by municipality basis. So, and I know that with some of the flooding we've had over the past almost a decade now, that we've had some severe flooding, those experiences identified that some of these communities down the river could see the flood coming a long ways away. So there may be value in that, but it's no longer part of the prescriptive requirements of the plumbing code and no longer acceptable for backflow protection. So thank you very much for that. Floor flanges. Here's another one that I've seen for a while. And as we go along, we'll try to take questions. In the event there isn't, there's too many of them, because this is being recorded, we may push them to the end. But I see you with your hand up, Mark. Question, please.
So for those situations where they're going to put a valve in or a screw cap, would that require a variance, or would it just be something that the SCO allows them to do because of the situation?
Yeah, it could be just allowed, but it may be a variance. If it's prescriptive, and say it's a floor drain, if you have a floor drain that has to be there to satisfy a requirement out of the building code, in the event that you're putting a cap on it, how do we know that that floor drain is available for those prescribed situations? So that there may be times where it needs to be considered under a variance, but that you'd have to, we'll develop that on a case-by-case basis. So if one municipality wants to do a lot of these, in addition to normally closed or appropriately located, normally open, that would be fine. Hope that helps, Mark.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks. Okay, and then moving on to floor flanges. So with floor flanges, what we've had is a tradition for water closet bowls had to be connected to the plumbing system. So the floor flange had to be connected to the plumbing system, and then indirectly or through some other means, we can attach everything to the floor. So the toilet could be hooked to the floor, but it had to be hooked to the floor flange as a prescriptive requirement in the code. There's a number of manufacturers and places around the world that use toilets that don't connect that way. They do connect to the plumbing system, but not in a way that they're rigidly attached. And so that this code change allows broader global range of products to be available within the Canadian market that could be certified to Canadian standards and consequently used. So with this one here, this water closet bowl that hopefully we don't see a big leap in technology, but there are some low flush and high efficiency appliances that couldn't make it into the Canadian market because of this requirement. So now that this is available, we may start seeing a different range of toilets that are available out there. And those water closets come with their own challenges. Some countries around the world have very high drop spaces within the bowl, and certain cultures takes a while for everybody to get used to that. So we'll see whether this is something that has a dramatic effect on us, if we'll continue to have traditional floor flanges bolted with T-bolts to water closets, or whether we'll see a significant shift to other mechanisms. And so I'll be looking to this group to continue to provide evidence that this is okay, this is working, we like it, we don't like it, those kinds of things. So this is a change that was supported at the national level, supported through public consultation, but it'll be interesting to see how well this comes out when being applied with some of the newer products that are potentially now coming into our industry. Pressure testing. This information there's information out there regarding pressure tests with the addition of non-toxic substances. So some of you may remember I've been promoting aerosol vapor mist. It was a company developed in Alberta to be able to use an aerosol vapor mist that's very detectable, very visible, very easily detectable in the ultraviolet spectrum, depending on the oils that are used. And it works really well with a drainage system in freezing conditions. So in the wintertime, if you're having a pressure test on a drainage system, but you can't do it hydrostatically with water, and you want to stay under that 5 psi, there hasn't been a lot of flexibility with that. So we'll get into it a little bit more. I think I've got another slide coming up with it, but do keep that in mind that this is an Alberta solution that worked into the codes. There was many code changes that were intended to fix some testing tables for, the bigger a plumbing system, the longer we test it, those kinds of things. They haven't all made it into the body of the code, but we do have this allowance for these non-toxic indicating substances, and that it may actually be a real assistance for cold weather testing within drainage systems. But similarly, there may be some options within the water systems. Again, making sure that whoever's coming forward with technology understands the need to make sure it meets potable water requirements if that's necessary, or etc. So we'll want to keep those kinds of things in mind. So now clean out showers and clothes washers. I kind of threw a whole bunch on this slide. There's a lot of information in here, but the codes have changed to say that a clean out where you used to be worried about body fluids is now a clean out that needs to be relocated so that whoever's using the clean out isn't affected by the hazardous waste. So this used to be a real issue in hospitals that, well, isn't the whole hospital a hazardous waste? And isn't the stuff coming out of a toilet a hazardous waste? And so this clarification about body fluids versus hazardous waste has given us the opportunity to be able to clarify it where we're not tempted to have particularly challenging cleanouts added to drainage systems serving water closets. But it still allows the ability that if you're using whether it's radioactive chemicals that are being discharged, whether it's in a laboratory setting, university, etc., there's the ability to make sure that the cleanouts that could be exposed to that hazardous waste are available in some location where the installer service techs can be able to manage that. The next part in this slide is the additions of small or low volume shower heads, medium volume shower heads, and greater volume shower heads. So we used to have numbers of, one shower head or 1 to 3, and it's basically come down to if you put 1 or 2 or 3 shower heads, what's the actual volume being discharged into that shower, and how does that fit within those tables and the various requirements for drainage and calculation for fixture units and those types of things. So new tables for that with table 2493 that has it. And then the clothes washer trap shall not be less than NPS 2. Look at that. Somebody spelled 2 as TO. So that's my bad. We'll correct that in the next version. So the ability for clothes washers to have some requirements as to where they're stalled, how far the fixture inlet is, trap arms, considering sud zones. We've had such a maturing of requirements for clothes washers, but there's now a requirement in the code to make sure that the 2-inch is addressed in there. And just an afterthought within this discussion is that the code did go through and remove some stuff that said 2.5 inch. Well, we can't get a 2.5 inch. There was agreement that we can't get a 2.5 inch, and that there may not be any value in the code in maintaining requirements for 2.5 inch material. We used to defend 2.5 inch for some stormwater applications because you could get it and you could potentially use a steel line for those applications. But to meet the DWV requirements within the code, no longer made sense for that. So a lot of information on one slide. Hopefully everybody's keeping up with us. Next is on to potable and non-potable water systems. This is the lion's share of what we'll be talking about today. And so there are a number of slides in here, as well as a number of duplications in it. And some of them are to try to get you to kind of link one portion of the code within the other, or recognize that we've got some fundamental shifts and some fairly big blocks of text, at least considering what we usually find within the National Plumbing Code. So the first one is the separation of water supplies. Any of you who have been working with water reuse and trying to figure out how to manage the Alberta winter for a water reuse system. How do we get water into there when it quits raining and it's just snow or ice outside? How do we get these water reuse systems? So as we look at drainage systems, stormwater systems, etc., there's been a long-standing struggle between how do we supply water into there and at the same time manage the risk to a potable water supply. So there was a number of changes within the code, and I've captured references to them in here, but they're about making sure that if you have a public or a private water supply, the public water supply shall be protected. If you have a potable and a non-potable water supply that interconnects, the potable water supply shall be protected. And so these requirements in a number of different clauses have been brought in to align that, to recognize we've got good backflow protection. We can protect the water, so we don't have to have an air gap each time. There are other reasons why we should have other systems, but in all cases, we need to establish a priority within an interconnected system, and from there establish the expectation that these systems are being protected. So clauses for public versus private, and clauses for potable versus non-potable. And this may come into some others, but it's going to come into a number of places where it's kind of spread all over the code to be able to address the requirements for changes for backwater or backflow protection or in different parts of the code, references to standards that have had significant updates, and then all of the language within Part 6 and Part 7 of the code. So with that, we have the design requirements for non-potable rainwater harvesting systems. So this clause is about that, or this slide is about that introduction for non-potable rainwater. Rainwater's historically been outside of the scope of the code. The water that falls on ground as rain or falls on the roof as rain, we've worked for some time. So for me, it's been almost 15 years that I've been working with this file with Alberta Municipal Affairs to be able to consider, well, what is rainwater and what's health's interest, what's environment's interest, and similarly, what does this mean within the plumbing system, within a specific property size? So the requirements for rainwater has always been outside of scope. We don't talk about rainwater, but once it becomes stormwater, it's ours and we'll have to manage that. And so that's given us the opportunity to work nationally with developing rainwater harvesting guidelines. And we've worked on them with Alberta, or with Mortgage and Housing, with federal authorities, as well as through various authorities in Alberta. And we've published for over a decade rainwater harvesting guidelines and handbooks to be able to address this technology. Now, for the first time, rainwater's come into the code. It's now part of our language. It's now part of the scope of the code. So rather than talking about the plumbing system after the rainwater harvesting system, we're now incorporating the rainwater harvesting as part of the plumbing system. And that means we now have extra work. Is it on a single property so that rainwater harvesting system becomes part of the plumbing system, or is it outside the property and falls under the Ministry of Environment and Health? And that still may involve the municipality, but it won't directly involve you as the authority having jurisdiction. It's about when it crosses that property line, is it potable water or is it non-potable water? As long as somebody's defined that, that gives us the opportunity to move forward and utilize the code. But in the event it's not defined as non-potable water, you've got nothing to accept that with. So if it's developed, collected, treated, stored on a single property, somebody's got to define that water as non-potable to bring it back in. Even if they're using words like it's non-potable rainwater, so there's no risk, that's fine. No. Unless somebody defines that as non-potable rainwater, it doesn't exist and you cannot accept it. So that theme's going to come around over the next 10 or 20 slides about making sure that as the authority having jurisdiction, you have some confidence to know, how do I use these plumbing requirements? And consequently, what does that mean regarding what can I accept? What can I accept on behalf of or through a variance? And what is the municipality that you may be working for? What is their responsibility in approving non-potable water, or maybe environment, or maybe health? And again, those things are ongoing and come with some challenges. And we've got some references in here that are linked back to the discussions within the National Plumbing Code to be able to move in a direction to have this growth of rainwater introduction into the plumbing code and still be able to have straightforward paths for compliance. So that that way, whoever's applying to you to do this, they have to do these things. And I see people that apply to us indirectly through the local authority that come and say, here's a very sophisticated system and we're going to bring it right up to potable water. That's a different risk and a different conversation, but it's also equally offset by the applications that come that say, I know this is a good system. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to define it. I'm not going to treat it. And it's acceptable. Let me go ahead and do this. And this new requirements within the code, it's critical that the industry is able to say, yes, these are enabled pieces of legislation that allow you to do these things. under this specific set of requirements. And where is the data, the documentation, the evidence of compliance? And we'll be using the prescriptive requirements in the code as well as the information in the notes page to be able to link together the requirements within the code to be able to do these things. So now water reuse requires a water quality identified. I keep talking about that as that's the definition of non-potable. It's monitored for compliance by an authority. That's what the code says. Who is that authority? You are the authority having jurisdiction for the plumbing discipline, but you are not an authority who approves water quality. That's somebody else. That's the municipality. That's a third-party laboratory working on behalf of the municipality. It's Alberta Health and Alberta Environment that are consulting and providing guidance to the municipality through their existing approvals or through another method that ultimately has, in all of these conversations, the municipality is that authority having jurisdiction. This clause does not speak to whether a municipality is accredited or not. So whether you're in an ASCA jurisdiction that's not accredited in the plumbing discipline, or whether you're in a municipality that is accredited in the plumbing discipline, this clause does not bring that to you or exempt you. It simply says that the municipality has that role. So an accredited municipality has to define the water as non-potable water for you to use it. And that that's whether that's on-site or off-site, and that it might go through regulations of environment to get there, or it might go through regulations under the Safety Codes Act to get there. But in all cases, the municipality will be responsible for making the definition of water quality. So this has been relocated in the code. It used to say there was water accepted in the past, and it's continued accepted may be warranted. There were some challenges where different groups were uncomfortable with that, but we still maintained the requirement that the definition or approval of non-potable water needs to be identified by an authority. So that's still in here. We'll reference the specific clause for this one as we get going, and it is actually on this clause under note A2711 that helps define that, where this clause says that it needs to be designed, installed in subject to good engineering practice. It's really nice to have that. So that gives you the authority under the prescriptive requirements of the code to say, what is good engineering practice? Well, we've got a whole bunch of other guidelines in Alberta and a whole bunch of other documents, whether they're notices or standards or Alberta Health Guidelines, those kinds of things, and we'll be talking about them. Those need to be part of that, that if somebody says to you, I'm doing this under good engineering practice, you can say, but I've got all these lists of things that you need to consider that are being suggested is good engineering practice. Where's your evidence of compliance with those? Now with that, these notes and changes affect a fundamental split within the non-potable water discussions. So we used to have one non-potable section and everything applied to everything. Now we have a non-potable water section and a rainwater harvesting section, so that we have different requirements, uses for both of them. And there's some general things that apply to all non-potable applications, whether it's non-potable water regardless of the source, or whether it's non-potable water specifically from rainwater. There's still risks. There's still a need to make sure that we're able to consider those risks and make sure that some authority identifies that they're managing that risk, so you can move forward as the plumbing SCO and be able to potentially accept and successfully pass an installation. But we'll keep looping back around to this unique separation between your role as a safety codes officer and the role of the municipality as an approval authority. Okay, with that, we'll continue to move on. We're in non-potable water. We've had some changes in clarification about where does this non-potable water run within a building, you know, so that we're running it to a number of things. So it used to be, or the last code was water closets, urinals, and underground irrigation. Now, there's some people that were confused about that. Well, underground irrigation maybe has pop-up or has a hose that comes out of the ground and trickles. And so the clarification is that it's directly connected underground irrigation systems. That means the water never comes to the surface. That, you know, that growth in clarification was necessary so that as we see different risks for underground irrigation than above ground irrigation, then there's different ability to utilize these, and it adds potential confidence for the authority, yourselves, as safety codes officers, to be able to accept this. So we really want to focus on this because it's going to flip here in a couple of slides. So the general section of non-potable water says you can bring a water source from anywhere, from black water, gray water, whatever you can identify it from. Identify the source, treat it to some quality, store it, and then use it for something. And that at the moment, this may or may not include rainwater, and you can use it for these limited applications. Trap seal primers was a no-brainer in the time of, you know, we're trying to get where if we're losing water out of a system, it's a terrible thing to waste potable water. But if we're going to be using water for trap seal primers, it made sense to be able to offer the non-potable option. To be able to have some continued growth in that industry, because there is some challenges regarding what trap seal primers are like if you don't have water. Boy, there's nothing better than water for sealing traps. So we've learned that. And so that is a relatively small change, but it's about addressing that we're seeing a fundamental shift for non-potable water applications within the body of the code. Now, A277 talks about good engineering practice and some references regarding handbooks and the requirements that are available through Canadian standards, such as the B128. The .1 and the .2 are documents that are that have been around quite a while for the design and installation of non-potable water systems. We also have a B128.3 that's now showing up in the body of the code to be able to address different challenges. So regarding what type of equipment, what type of certification that we have. Similarly, we're actually looking at cisterns in a different way. So that'll come up in a few minutes. Now, with non-potable water design, this language in the back talks about the growing interest, where we're using this, where we're potentially not using it, and the growth in the acceptance of use for this, and perhaps some reduction in the social concept of that yuck factor regarding this is my sewage and I'm doing what with this? So as we continue to watch that grow, it's reasonable that this will follow along with that. But this clause also is where that it's maintained that non-potable water must meet applicable water quality standards as determined by an authority having jurisdiction. That means some municipality is defining it as non-potable water. So this will come up again regarding, well, non-potable water and rainwater harvesting. So as we look at the growth within this, it keeps coming back to that. So That's intended to be a support for a safety codes officer asked to consider a non-potable water system. This is the first thing out of the gate that we need to get off the table. Somebody else will define that and will approve that water quality, and will manage it, will oversee it over a period of weeks, months, years, whatever might be agreed upon. And that authority has the ability to say, you're now no longer in compliance. This water's no longer approved. This system is no longer safe. And that's the authority that's responsible to be able to say back to a safety codes officer or the department for the plumbing trade and say, this installation that was accepted is now no longer meeting the prescriptive requirements of the code, and you need to do something about it. Then you can take that information from that authority saying the water's no longer non-potable. Then you're put back in a position, whether that's a week later, a year later, or 20 years later, to be able to go back into that system and say, you have a non-potable water system in here that is no longer approved, shut it down, fix it, replace it, repair it, whatever that case may be. And so if we're in a big commercial setting where the non-potable water is going out to a whole subdivision, a whole city, if that were the case, that's one thing, because it's reasonable that that company would have some size, some integrity, a range of staff to be able to manage these things. But what happens when it's a small summer village with only one administrator? What happens when it's a house with only one owner? And that when you get into those kinds of things, what happens when that one person that might or may not do this passes away or quits doing the work, or just simply quits or gets fired? Those types of things. We might end up with this system that was compliant is now all of a sudden non-compliant. And there's no way for us in that capacity as safety codes officers to be able to manage that risk. We can't take that on and say, we'll approve it and we'll go look at it every year and we'll make sure that it's enforced for the rest of its life. Not our career, not our accreditation within the municipality, for the rest of its life. So if you don't have somebody that's doing the approval as an authority having jurisdiction that's separate from you, you're accepting a risk that's really unreasonable. So keep that one in mind. That will, again, we'll loop back around to that a little bit. Now, markings have changed within the requirements of the code, and that's because rather than a very objective or a very broad statement regarding identification, the committees decided, no, let's get really prescriptive. Let's put in the markings that are required, that are specifically identified, and they're clearly laid out within the B128 series of standards. So now the code says you shall have identification in accordance with the 128s. And with that, then there's the ability to be able to look at these standards. The designer, the owner, the representative, installer is going to have to satisfy these requirements for markings. And for today's purpose, we've got a couple of them in here where Section 12 talks about that the clearly identified requirements, and another standard that is a marking standard. So the GCSB 24.3 is a marking standard that's referenced throughout all of the codes. Pipeline codes use it. The pressure equipment codes use that. So this code's everywhere, but it's making sure that we've got the identification. And in this case, we want a warning saying it's non-potable water. We want it purple in color or marked with a continuous stripe. So does that mean that IPEX or somebody's going to come out with a purple stripe pipe? That'll be a business case for them to consider. But depending upon the growth of water reuse, making sure that it's marked so that no matter who cuts a hole in the drywall and finds a pipe, that they can easily identify that it's non-potable water rather than connecting into it for a drinking fountain that they might add after the fact, and those types of things. So that those requirements for markings go on further into permanent, distinct, easily recognizable letters 5 millimeters high and colors that contrast and repeats at intervals of no more than 1.5 meters. One of the interesting things they added in here was buried piping. So we want to make sure that the buried pipe is identified, but a tracer wire. Tracer wires are kind of new in the plumbing industry. We've used to them in the gas discipline, so we've seen them for a while. So it's reasonable, but it'll be interesting to see how many come out with the old tracer tapes that were relatively inexpensive, but really susceptible to damage and then failure for identification purposes. But this is a new requirement within the code saying we've got to make sure that we've got a tracer wire on water reuse piping that falls under the non-potable requirements within Part 7. Similarly, making sure that the identification is clear, meeting some minimum requirements for size, whether that's English and or the equivalent French, as well as there's a picture showing that not less than for size, indicating a generic non-potable water indicator. So also too, within the codes, we've had some clarification regarding we historically didn't want non-potable water to be able to drip because of a leak or be tied into for convenience purposes or accidentally to end up having non-potable water in a food plant where it could be either leaked or discharged into a non-pressurized tank or above the cover of a pressurized tank. Again, trying to minimize that, the contamination. So that's been clarified, or at least the intent of it is to be clarified regarding that broader or a more objective statement saying that if you locate those pipes over any food, drink intended for human consumption, needs to be prohibited. So we don't want it there, have that piped around that. So it shouldn't be a real change within the industry, but potentially a clarification for other processing plants where it wasn't always clear whether that device or that area was prohibited or was intended to be redirected to ensure non-potable water was not located there. So there's a second set that's just similar like that regarding non-potable water and making sure that it, where it discharges, that we're not contaminating potable water and we're not in an issue where we have potential contamination of food that's consumed for humans. All right, everybody try your thumbs up feature. How are we doing? We're about an hour into it and we're a little over halfway done the slides. But I'm just looking for, I see one thumb up. We got a couple of guys hanging in there. Okay, so that means there's still a couple of guys with us. And hopefully everybody's doing okay. I'm trying to think who it was that we had a big group potentially in the Calgary office. Hopefully those guys are still used to being able to sit that close together and listen to each other. So I hope that's still working out. Okay, great. I'm glad to see that. And I'm glad to see I can still look at the thumbs up and see that information beside us. So this is the bulk of the changes for non-potable water traditional. So this is black water, gray water, regardless of the water source. If you have an unknown water that's coming from somewhere, whether it's be through environment, etc., that all of that's going to fall under these prescriptive requirements that we talked about, as well as the other historical changes for non-potable water that haven't been updated for this current version of the code. Now we're going to move on to the brand new, rather than just a single new, with the rainwater harvesting. So with rainwater harvesting, we're again introducing language into the code that I've spent years, a couple of decades, trying to make sure rainwater didn't get into the code. But there's still some rainwater that isn't in the code, like a rain barrel. So if somebody wants to collect water in a rain barrel and pour it on their plants, on their garden, etc., that's still out of scope. Matter of fact, it's still out of scope with environment. And so, rain barrels, we're not going to touch that. But in the event that you're going to collect water, might look like a rain barrel, but it's not. Now it's going to be a cistern of some kind. We're collecting water from rainwater, and we're going to store it for a certain amount of time. Then we're going to do a certain amount of things to it, and we're going to bring it into the facility as non-potable water. That triggers the first discussion that happens in here. So while you're reading, I'll reintroduce that first discussion. And that is that who defined this rainwater as non-potable rainwater? So how did we get from rainwater to non-potable rainwater? Well, we can't do that. You as a safety codes officer can't say, I looked at that rainwater coming down there and I've decided it is non-potable rainwater. You can do whatever you want with it. Don't go there. We'll get through that again through the links of the language within the prescriptive requirements of the codes, the notes pages, and even the legislation to be able to help us get back to how does the municipality under the Municipal Government Act, and there is some other legislation out there, how do they recognize that it's their responsibility to define this as non-potable water? Okay, we'll try to get into a bunch of stuff. So to start with, rainwater harvesting, it's a brand new thing. So all of section 7.2 is brand new. And so here's 2 pages of it. And so these are a brand new set of requirements. But before we get into there, we'll start with this storm water that is discharged from an above ground roof surface. So I've been saying for years, when somebody's doing rainwater harvesting that was outside of our scope then, you had to do it off of a catchment surface. And in principle, it was the roof of a single family dwelling. As soon as you fall on the roof of a commercial building, it's storm water. Don't try to tell me it's rainwater, it's storm water. As soon as water falls out of the sky and hits a parking lot, it's storm water. Doesn't matter. What about the grass? As soon as the water hits the grass, storm water. So the only place we have rainwater is falling out of the sky onto the roof of a single family dwelling. Okay, we'll get to that in a little bit. And there is some stuff within the prescriptive requirements of the code that harmonize with that or align with that concept. That there's going to be a temptation for really large applications, whether it's the mall, the hospital, the school, etc., to go look at all of this water we can collect, and we can do some things with it because we've got a stormwater management challenge where we've got to retain the water, we've got to store it, we've got to do a bunch of things with it. So why can't we reuse this? And why can't we reuse this using this new language? It's because you can't. That all that water that's being collected as storm water falls into the potential for 271, and that's non-potable water. So it's got to meet all of the other requirements and be considered for the other uses because it isn't rainwater. Rainwater, again, is a very narrow application of water that falls out of the sky and does not include storm water. So we'll get into those kinds of things regarding some of this stuff, and you can see on the bottom of this page, but does not include a rain barrel. So hopefully that doesn't trip us up. We just didn't want to get into the point where regulating a rain barrel because of the historical and past uses of it just didn't make sense to put it in the plumbing code because it's been unregulated and with a narrow range of risk for generations. So similar to using a dugout in jurisdictions in Alberta where you can't plant a well or establish other natural water sources, and you're in a rural atmosphere. So some of those dugouts were part of that past practices where it was acceptable in the past and its continued use may be warranted. There's still a value for having that kind of consideration. But as we go into more and more complicated systems, it was critical to get prescriptive requirements in here. So again, I know this isn't big enough for everybody to kind of have a look at or to blow up to it, but just know that we'll be talking about some of this stuff, and it refers back to other sizes, and it talks about what is a roof, how big is it, how long is it, what do we consider with it, what are the things we need to do if we're just looking at this, regarding first flushes and debris. How do we get rid of rain and that first layer of squirrel droppings and bird droppings that may be on the roof? How do we try to redirect that to another location before we start harvesting? Those types of things. And so that was considered. But I want the group to recognize when these code changes were being developed, there wasn't a standard for rainwater harvesting available in Canada. Once this was published, so was a document called CSA B805. That document is a rainwater harvesting document. Well, and that's where almost all of this language came from. So the CSA B805 is a really good document that talks about where does the water come from, how do we collect it, how long do we store it, how do we treat it, and what do we use it for? And it's a birth to death approach to looking at water. We watch the water all the way through the system so that by the time the water comes out of the end of the system, we still have confidence that it's going to be of a reasonable quality or a minimum that we can identify through a number of different ways. So when we're developing the non-potable water requirements, that code, that standard wasn't available. So a great deal of that text got put into here. And so there is a bunch of people across Canada that are saying this stuff should have never gone in this code because it's in an existing standard. But it was a cart and a horse. We didn't have it. We wanted to go forward. And in order to introduce rainwater harvesting, we had to have these requirements. And we moved on the expectation that the CSA B805 would not be published. Well, it has, but it does align. It says the same thing as that's in here. And so we could expect future codes to actually look lighter and start removing some of this text as we reference better standards for products. And as we see better certification standards come out for products that take the water and treat it to an acceptable water quality under an expectation from the Standards Council of Canada and a certification body that gives us confidence. A piece of equipment that comes with an installation manual and a maintenance guide and those types of things that would reasonably support a longevity and the ability for these pieces of equipment to work for some time. So having said that, we'll tear on looking at non-potable rainwater harvesting systems. So this is some of the language off of the text that's in there. This is actually from a previous page within the body of the code. But this talks about rainwater from an above ground source and non-potable rainwater harvesting systems. So now we're talking about what's in the plumbing code now. It's a tank, pump, pipes, fittings. We used to talk about the foot valve as the start of the plumbing system to be able to go in. And now for the purposes of rainwater harvesting, we're actually talking about the storage tank. So now we need to actually talk about cisterns and stuff like that. So the reference to the B126 is now in the code because of rainwater harvesting. And it's reasonable that at some future date, we'll have more cistern stuff start to show up in part 6 of the code to be compatible with this. Why do we need certified septic tanks and certified cisterns for rainwater harvesting if we don't have anything for potable water? So there's just a blurb for the future that's independent of what we're talking about today. So now permitted applications, here's a big step. If you get the non-potable water that's rainwater approved by an authority having jurisdiction, and that's some other authority. If you get that water approved, here it says you can use it for toilets, clothes washers, service sinks, laundry trays, trap primers, irrigation, hydronics, makeup water, and other applications where harvested rainwater is not expected to be ingested or inhaled. So that might make it a bit of a problem for cooling towers and those types of things. But, you know, any other application, boy, that opens it up pretty wide. And so we have notices and variances, as well as stand data for non-potable water applications to give some guidance. Boy, they don't include any of this stuff. So that's reasonable. That might come. We'll get people saying, I'm going to do this, and I don't have to do anything else. Well, now you got a fight on your hands. But if somebody says, I want to do all of this, and I've got approval from the county, from the municipality to do this, they're going to approve my water quality, there may be no reason not to consider it. So do watch these this grocery list of requirements that's come into the code. Again, this is a reference to the annex and the notes pages regarding above ground roof services to say, well, what is this? You know, how many surfaces can we consider? And that, you know, you can look at this and there are some different ways of considering it. I always say the roof of a single family dwelling we're in, and then beyond that, it gets a little tough to be able to consider that because it's pretty easy to identify most other applications of rainwater becoming stormwater. You know, so that as soon as it hits that surface, it's now stormwater and we're out. And so then they've got to go back to the other non-potable water section if they want to do something, and they have to abandon a rainwater harvesting pathway. So that means somebody's going to say, I want a variance to use the rainwater uses with my other non-potable water. Well, that increases the risk. May be reasonable, and there may be ways of doing that. Well, how are we going to get there? So we'll go on to these other clauses that talk about treatments and use, about traffic, roofing and conveyance. This all kind of comes back to what I was talking about the roof of a single family dwelling. A non-potable rainwater design also means to treat that rainwater harvesting in such a manner that the quality of the non-potable water conforms to an appropriate provincial or territorial requirement. Well, what is that? That is defined by the municipality when they say it's non-potable water. That ain't you. So how are we going to get there? And what Alberta's done is we've got the public use guidelines. We've been talking about these for almost 2 years now, maybe a little more. COVID has a way of mining away time from us. So these have actually been around for a while. And this is where the guidelines are. This is a tool for you as a safety codes officer to use, but it's critical that the municipality is looking at this document when they say, I approve this water as non-potable water. Go ahead, Mr. Plumber, and use this under your permitted activity. The local safety codes officer will be out there to have a look at it. So those public health guidelines continue to establish this. So 21, so we're a little over 2 years ago, and this document identifies those risks. And the risks aren't zero. Some of them might be, depending upon how they look at it. If they want to take rainwater and use it for food, if they want to wash trucks with it, if they want to use it for recreational water, all of these things create different opportunities and challenges and different reductions in the potential need to treat it. So how do we filter it? How do we store it? How do we treat it? How do we use it? Do we need ultraviolet? Do we need chlorination? Do we need all of those things? This document gives some guidelines and lines up some options, but it also adds some other things that if you're going to use it for recreational water, well, what are you doing talking to us? You need to talk to health, because they're the ones that regulate recreational water out at the lake. And if you want to dump it back in the lake, you're going to need to get that approval from them to say, yes, we approve this non-potable water as meeting the recreational water requirements, and away we go. So this is not going to be simple, and that document isn't simple, but it comes with a set of tools to be able to say, here, for your use and for your application and for your source, you have to do nothing or you have to do everything. And by having these tools, a safety codes officer can say, it's not my responsibility to approve this, but I can tell you it don't meet the minimum requirements. Go see the municipality, go see their third-party lab, go see the representative from health or the representative from environment who's assisting in this, because it all comes back around to what is that local requirement. In Alberta, it's these Health Canada these Alberta Health Guidelines. They're the best, the biggest, the best, and the greatest. They're made to a Canadian model. They follow that CSA B805, that idea of water from birth to death. Where do we get the water from? Everything in between, and what are we going to use it for? So as we go through those kinds of things, this code does identify some other stuff like healthcare facilities. How do we make sure that we don't contaminate somebody? So there's a prohibition in there that says, if you're going to do all this with water reuse, don't use it in healthcare facilities. So it shall not be used in there. We do have notices out. A number of these are available out, through municipal affairs, and there's a full set of new standards that are parked in the alberta.ca website. So all of your subscription members will be getting flooded with standards. So they've all been published as of today, and so they're all going to be shared through the subscription list to make sure everybody gets access to that. Now, I know that was a whack of information about rainwater harvesting and water reuse. Go over it, have a look at it, talk with your coworkers about water reuse, talk to them about who's responsible for what, so that you can work together with a team. If you're alone in an agency or in a jurisdiction, reach out to others, to municipal affairs, as you need to make sure you've got the tools when somebody says, I'm going to reuse water. What do I do? And so good luck with that. We're also continuing to work with Alberta Environment to try to build a better jurisdictional document. Things like government elections, all of those kind of things do kind of impact those developments. But we're still talking about it regarding when you get to here, it's environment. When you get to here, it's health. When you get to here, it's municipal affairs and the local authority having jurisdiction. So keep that in mind. And with that, we're moving on to new materials. Personal hygiene devices. We've got a new standard in there and an expectation that if you're going to wash your bottom with cold water right out of the tap, good on you. But it shall be certified. So there's some prescriptive requirements to make sure that these personal devices are certified and do have some protection so that we have the appropriate vacuum breaker to be able to protect them. We've also got some additional clarification within temperatures, because the building code has enhanced requirements that are cooler for institutional applications. And so we wanted to harmonize with that so that we have a 49 degrees as a terminal unit, but 43 in healthcare facilities. But there's also an increasing growth of understanding that we can't leave the water temperature that low in the line. So we've got to get out of the business of cooling the whole system down to 49 degrees. The water system needs to be 60 degrees. We've got to keep it high enough to control Legionella, and at the same time, every terminal unit is necessary. So there's been some wording within the code that's changed some things to have an expectation that we're protecting people from scalding, and we're doing those types of things, but that we've got an elevated temperature within the hot water side, enough to be able to control the growth of Legionella. Never stops it, and it never eliminates it, because we're always replenishing, and there's always Legionella in the water. But as long as we can keep the growth of it low enough that we're not providing opportunities for people to be sick, then we've met the requirements. So there's expectations that we're going to have higher temperature in the water line, and better expectations that we're going to have terminal units that are going to be able to protect us. Here's some more language in here, and I won't go through it all, but it follows that same idea. We're looking for more certification of products to a better standard, and we're looking at making sure that we're going to be able to do our best to ensure that we're not scalding people, and at the same time, we're keeping the water system safe. So there's lots of information to go through here. But do kind of keep that in mind, that as we look at that, the introduction of new requirements aren't really new requirements, because we've had the B125 in the code for a long time. But we now have, in this page, we've got a B125-16. So that means 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, well, they all belong somewhere else. So we've had this growth in the standards for temperature control, and within those standards, the various parts of the standards are now better suited to be able to give us more confidence regarding these types of products. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to stop what people can buy off of Amazon and import across the border. But if you get a chance to look at it as a safety codes officer, there's a whole bunch of guidance in here regarding those performance characteristics that we want to be able to ensure. A little bit further on regarding some of the broader language regarding scalding temperatures and the need to be able to change or lower the temperature within places with risk, with very small children, with seniors that are of limited mobility and such, to be able to manage scalds that can even happen at 49 degrees over an extended period of time. So the backflow protection, B64, there's a number of changes and updates to them, and the B6410 is something you guys should live in. You should have access to it. Find somebody who's got the B6410, because it's about the installation of backflow preventers. So even though we've got the installation code within the plumbing code, and we've got a series of backflow prevention standards, the B6410 specifically has guidance that when you look at an installation, you need to be able to maintain current tools with the B6410 to be able to see that. There's a lot of language within the code, and even in the 3-column documents regarding the B64 and its requirement. And I've always liked talking to the industry about that because of these effing valves. So we've got a DUCF and a DCVAF, an RPF. And so I've always meant it in the kindest possible way that we've never been able to buy effing valves. We don't know why the effing valves are in the code. And it's been some struggle because we used to amend the code in Alberta to be able to give the options that are now in the code. And when we automatically adopted it, it tripped us up for a while because we had these fire rated valves that created some confusion with the industry. So at least now within the 2020 version of the code, they say, if you can't find a F-rated valve, use the regular valve. So use the double checked RPs, etc., as necessary to be able to meet those prescriptive requirements. Low lead is growing. There's always more stuff in the code, so there's new requirements within standards that we continue to watch because we don't want Alberta or other jurisdictions to be a dumping ground for lead. Flexible water connectors, that standard's been updated. We've been talking about this for the past couple of years, that there's really high incidence of failures within certain braided connectors. And it's not necessarily low lead, but I wanted to make sure I held it in this picture so that the Insurance Institute of Canada continues to say that the highest volume of water damage in their records is because of flexible connectors. So they're saying flexible connectors are a problem. The industry's been pushing to standard development regarding, do we accept these? Do we remove these from the code? And so hopefully the growth of the standard is there, but it comes down to a challenge to all of you safety codes officers is that where is the failure of these connectors that say there's something wrong with the B126, or there's something wrong with the connector, or there's something wrong with the installer, those types of things. So keep that in mind. So with those flexible water connectors, we've got that new standard. We've got additional requirements within the code for PEX fittings. And it's really about the introduction of manufacturer approved fittings, so that it used to be proprietary, where you had one PEX manufacturer pipe, a PEX manufacturer fittings, and a PEX manufacturer of those instructions, and you couldn't always maintain certification or warranty because of the limitations that if you used a product from somebody else, it'd be a problem. So the code recognized that, and by this tweak, the effort is that if you have a pipe by one manufacturer and a fitting by another manufacturer and an expander ring or a crimp ring by a third manufacturer, as long as they all talk to each other and they're manufacturer approved, you're good to go. And so do watch that. Not that we always get a chance to look at pipe and fittings and rings, but that may be one of those things that could catch us up, or be able to actually have what might have been non-compliant yesterday actually might be fine now. So keep that one in mind. PERT is the new one. That's the sexy pipe of 2023. So polyethylene of raised temperature. And so they take and raise this temperature and stretch it and do some really interesting things with basically polyethylene. But because they do it under this process of heating and stretching, it really increases some durability, some wear tolerances, as well as some potential pressure and temperature tolerances in it. So they can actually stretch it so they get more pipe, and it's actually better for those applications. So that's new, including the standard for it. So again, you know, we were talking about the B125s a couple slides ago. This is the B137.18. Well, that's for PERT now, but 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, all of those others are for other different standards, PVC, polyethylene, ABS, etc., depending upon the range of them. Okay, PERT is filled throughout the code. So we've got the tables that had to be figured out. Can you use it underground, above ground, hot and cold, those types of things. So that's a new part of the table, just like there's a new clause. And so PERT's in about 7 or 8 places throughout the standard, just to recognize that. Fibro cement pipe and fittings might look like asbestos cement, but it isn't. And it's got a unique standard for it to be able to address that. Fibro cement under the 127.3 series. And so with that fibro cement, that's the last cog in the chain of removing asbestos from the codes. So there was a washing of the fire, building, farm, plumbing codes to remove the word asbestos from anywhere. And one of the things that was necessary is that, well, you know, for those applications, what do you do with that type of pipe? So there's a new standard and a new cement pipe that could fit some of those applications to be able to address repairs, replacements, ongoing challenges. Because, you know, when you open the walls and you dig up the floor and etc., you still may find that stuff there. Just because we've quit saying the word didn't mean it quit existing. So there's going to be some challenges out there. Protection of pipe trenches, an introduction of the concrete over top of the pipe. And so make sure you have a look at the protection of pipe trenches to go, is this or, is this and, is this, you know, can I do this in one place and that in another place? Where are the choices and where are the prescriptive requirements where I have to expect when I go out there that there will be concrete over this pipe. So watch that for sizes over and under, and you know, for what size that may apply to, the requirements for concrete. So make sure you go in and have a look at them. That clause is 2351. So that way it's at least recorded in here. It's also in the notes pages. And so because you get access to this presentation, go back and have a look at them. I'm not reading all the notes, but there's intended to be other information there that'll either fill in some gaps that I didn't want to take too much time reading in the slides. So the co-extruded polyvinyl chloride drain pipes. So this is Cellular. So Cellular PVC, that new standard, a new set of requirements. Alberta's been used to it because we had a province-wide variance. And so because of that province-wide variance and harmonization with what we expected in the code, it is the same. So as of April 1st, that variance expired and the code comes into force, which has exact same language as what was in the variance for cellular core. And that's recognizing, you know, we had shortages with pipe. We've had some problems with mixing pipe transitions and different challenges with transition cements, on and on, as well as the site-specific variance, and now incorporated within the body of the code. Also too, and I got a copy of the variance in here that it's exactly what's in the code, and there's page 2 of it. It's now been removed, it's expired, and so the actual code says these clauses. So within the body of the code, rather than having all of the front matter of the variance and the back of it and the signature, the technical requirements out of that stand data are in the code regarding the requirements for cell core PVC and the expectations, as well as limitations or prohibitions, so that we're not using it on really tall buildings and really big buildings. We don't want it in a return air space, and that will be looked at over the next couple of codes to see if that grows into something more than that. All right, and we've got valves, waste fittings, new requirements or new options regarding the expansions of standards, and having a manually operated valve up to 4 inch for a plumbing system. That's kind of new because, well, they were always out there. We were using valves, whether we should have or not, whether they were cast iron, whether they were rising stem, a gate or plug, etc. We were using them. So it's kind of nice to see the ability for the plumbing system to have a 4-inch valve in it that's certified, that kind of thing. So that again is a continued growth in the reference set of standards to help us. Flush valves similarly are identified under a clarified or an updated standard. Look at this one, B125.37. Okay, now what? What about 36, 35, 34, etc.? What a great opportunity. That might actually be nighttime reading to be able to go back and to say, I've looked at all of the B125 series of standards, and now I'm going to look at the B127 because I need to look at the B135 and on and on. Don't forget the 1800 series. That's a compendium of plastic standards within the industry. So that's 180s, 181s, etc. So we end up with hundreds of standards out there that we often don't look at. So they're often referenced in the front. Go have a look in all of the updated standards in the front of the code. You never know when you might need to reference one of them for an exam or something like that. And to be able to consider the implications for the products you're going out to look at. Am I looking at something that I'm going to expect that it be certified and there be a clear indication that it's certified to some standard by a Canadian company or a company recognized in Canada to label this? Because we're going to see lots of information coming out of Europe with the new CETA agreement that plumbing products are on that next or on the current phase. So we'll have companies certifying products to a Canadian standard, but marking them utilizing a European nomenclature and bringing them over here. So we like to see CSA and we like to see UL, and we often have opportunities to recognize repeating organizations, but that could grow to as many as 500 identifying organizations. Now, that's probably not reasonable, and maybe that's not going to happen in our career, but the number is going to grow, and it's going to be a real challenge for the safety codes officer because you're the one that's out there having a look at these products going, this is certified to one issue over another. And last but not least, one of the challenges local authorities are facing is that how come this has to be certified? I do this everywhere else and it doesn't have to be certified. Alberta and Quebec are the only provinces that have legislation that says if the standard's in the code, it shall be certified. And so we have to be friends through Quebec and Alberta to be able to work with this, because other jurisdictions can look at that word conform and say it conforms to the standard. It looks like a flush valve. It acts like a flush valve. It's chromy like a flush valve. I'm going to say it conforms to the standard and I can accept that. Some jurisdictions don't like that risk tolerance, and others may or may not understand it. But within Alberta, when somebody comes to you and says, why do I have to be certified? It's because the regulation says you have to be certified. And with that, I thank you very much. We're coming up to 2:40. I wanted to leave a reasonable time for some questions and etc. And so with that, I will open up the floor, and thank you very much for the hour and 40 minutes of trying to push this information into you. And I'd look forward to, I don't know if Chris is still on or who would be best suited to be able to help us with questions. Edith, I see you're still with us, so hopefully you can hear me as well.
Yeah, I can hear you and I'm here.
All right, I see Mark Harold had the first question earlier, so I know he's got two more saved. So rather than pushing you, Mark, what would you have for questions?
I don't have anything at this time, Sydney, other than to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I seen Andy. He's way up north, all over to the east. Andy, I haven't talked to you in a long time. Any thoughts on the presentation and whether we've said anything that's triggering stuff for you?
Can you hear me, Sydney? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
No, not at this time. I've been looking at this standard for better than a couple of, well, since since the beginning of the month, I actually got a copy of the draft and whatnot to review it. It's kind of straightforward. The harvesting issue, I don't think we're gonna have the water harvesting issue. We're not gonna see too much of that in our area as of yet. And I'll probably be long retired by the time I think I will have to worry about any of that.
I really appreciate that, and I think that might be nice. I wonder, yeah, if there's any of us, because I've seen a couple old retired guys join the conference, and they're probably going, "Oh, thank you. I may not see many of those," because it's really about what's in the pipe. And I've said it many times. It's not about how long the pipe is, how round it is, or how we hold it up. We got that covered. It's now that as safety codes officers, we got to talk more and more about what's in the pipe. What about Legionella? What about non-potable water? What about temperature? So all of these things are becoming critical, that we're considering that as safety codes officers. And each code that comes out, and this one's no exception, where we have a number of new things that have been identified as trying to clarify, expand the scope, and move that plumbing industry into a new world where chemistry and all of these things are going to play a much bigger role. So hopefully we got plumbers that are catching up with it, and technical institutes that develop skills to be able to pass on to journeymen and apprentices to be able to come to us with a better set of skills, rather than going, Mr. Safety Codes Officer, what do I do? So thanks, Andy. Okay, now you're breaking up on me, Andy.
Something else just now. You can still hear me, Sydney?
Just a little bit now.
I just thought of something else here, just as, okay. All right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. When there's a permit application from now on in, I think what I would seem to think municipalities should be looking at is on that permit application, there should be possibilities to be anything having to do with rainwater harvesting. The question should be asked, are you planning on introducing rainwater harvesting as part of your plumbing system? Yes or no? And that would kind of get things started in the right direction if some people are thinking that maybe we just can put it in and we might not see it, okay?
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, and I do think there's merit that as we look at more and more complexity, it's important to do plan reviews, and some jurisdictions are going to struggle with that. Others, I think, are already considering how do we manage this risk, and it might be a good advice for municipalities to be able to identify on their application, where are you with that? And similar things have been done for the private sewage industry. So hopefully that would be something that could be embraced at all. Thanks again, Andy. You bet. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll see. I see a COC, City of Calgary. How many guys you got around the table there, sir? You're off mute, but I can't hear you. And as always,
at the same time.
Oh, there you go. I can hear you now.
That was me, Sydney.
Oh, that was you, Mark. Okay.
Yeah, they all went to the bathroom at the same time.
Yeah. Well, for the City of Calgary, you guys, if you have comments or questions, you know how to get a hold of me. Do reach out for those types of things. Oh, look at that. A nice round picture. Okay, now I'll start counting. Okay. See that? Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, and another, and another, and another. Oh, that's more than I can count. Good to see you guys here. Nice to have the picture of the set. Thanks, Brad, for that. And like I said, if you guys can't, if you don't have questions, or if you do afterwards, let us know, because we'll do our best to be able to make sure there's messaging. We even talked with the council that in the event that we got enough questions, we could always collate them and attach it with the presentation. So there was kind of a Q&A section. So that kind of thing that, again, I look forward to. So with that, there's a whole bunch of other guys I'd like to point out, poke and stuff like that. Jerry Bond, I seen your picture on, your camera was on earlier in the discussion. You still with us, sir?
Yes, I'm here, Sid.
Good, Jerry. I know you've been in jurisdictions that have some unique ideas about how they would rule the world if they could use their own rainwater or wastewater. How are you doing out there?
It's still in production, and we might be giving you a call. He's kind of an engineer type of a guy, and seems to know all the answers. So, but we know where he's fallen through the cracks a bit with the authority having jurisdiction for his water, to type of water. So that's the main thing right there.
Yeah.
But we'll be in discussion with you soon.
Okay. Well, good. And I appreciate that. And that's, as I get more feedback from the industry, that's how I'm finding the message about rainwater harvesting and water reuse is that there's so much confusion out there regarding who's doing what, that I've shifted the focus to make sure you identify who's approving the water, who's defining the water, because they're the ones that have the opportunity to be able to smooth things over and fill in the holes. Because we've got the designer, we've got the owner, we've got the safety codes officer. We often know who the health is and who the representatives from environment are. But many of these applications, we don't know who the municipality is. And it can be tough, and it doesn't matter, like Brad, you and your group there, you can be right down the hallway or the next floor from the folks from the water department. And if you can't get clear direction or talking about who's going to take the responsibility and what, it can be a challenge. And on a case-by-case basis, it's taken us a while to build up a template and a tolerance for the ability to have all these people around the table whenever it comes to a water reuse discussion. So I don't think it's going to get easier with the way the plumbing code is split, but we've got some opportunities, and we've got some Alberta guidance that's intended to help us. And if you guys start getting poked and pushed on rainwater harvesting, get back to me. We'll figure out if we need another brochure or another bulletin or another stand data, something to be able to bridge the gap so that we can tell the owners, the designers, and etc. how to get back on this. Thanks. All right, and Sean Van Velzen, please. Thanks.
Yes, hello, Sydney. Thank you for your time for this afternoon and providing these key updates. I just have a question for you in regarding back into the non-potable water section, where the use of it comes into play, and it's other items that may not include inhalation and stuff like that. So when non-potable water is being reused in drive-through car washes, there's low risk on inhalation and stuff like that. So what route do these contractors seek at that point? Is that through a variance, or how do those get handled?
Again, they've all historically been through a variance to be able to use that, but it's not clear how the local authority manages a wastewater bylaw versus a plumbing code requirements or a permitted set of requirements. So keep in mind, it's kind of different by jurisdiction, but in principle, if you wanted to reuse that kind of water, there would be a variance. So who's approving it? And as long as there's an approval with it for that use, and somebody's established an equal or greater level of safety, that, we don't want the guys that are spraying down cattle trucks next to grandma spraying down the Mercedes. But if they're all in their vehicle driving through, then that's a different kind of risk. And, how are they managing that water quality? So it really comes down to if they're being done by variance, as long as you're documenting the process to ensure that some authority has approved that water. And we've had all kinds of them. Car washes, we've had some done by health that did it directly and did the approval and monitor it and watch it. Others are done by the municipality, and there are some that may have clear delineation regarding the risk, and that you will test and you will report, and it is collected. There are others who have approved it and may not have understood what they said when they said, we approve it, go ahead, no requirements. And so that's still all on the municipality. That falls under their requirement to approve that water quality, even for a car wash. And that as a safety codes officer, you may not want to accept that without clear evidence that the municipality has understood their risk. So again, there's so many different templates, and the car wash industry is unique because some jurisdictions require reuse because we don't want all that water consumed and just dumped into the sewer. So there might be a sewer bylaw that requires that reuse that does not take into consideration the requirements that the plumbing code expects we're going to keep people safe around this water reuse. And I've been in car washes that have gone septic. And so they're just a great big septic tank, and they're terrible. Just drive away when you find those. But as a local authority, if you're finalizing those installations under a plumbing permit, you may want to consider the risks that come with that. And, these discussions, hopefully they help to grow conversations so that with your water department, with your EPCORs, City of Calgary Water Department, etc., they're operating under approvals from environment. So that doesn't exempt them from the requirement. It just makes them responsible through two different legislative pathways. So they might have a role under the plumbing code requirement as an authority, but they also have a role under environment to make sure they meet their requirements. I see another one regarding spray parks. Spray parks are the same thing. If the water comes out of potable water, sprays out, goes down the drain, goes away, we're done. As soon as they want to reuse that, to what? Who's approving this? Is health approving it? Well, then maybe you can step back. If health's got all of the requirements, great. But if they don't, you can't let that installation move forward without knowing who approved that water quality. And how are you going to manage this expectation that if you're going to put a plumbing system in to do these things, you're going to run a drainage system and collect that water, store it, treat it, do something with it. Who's approving it? And so that tends to be that catch-all statement. If you get to the end of the project and you want to close that permitted activity, where's the approval documentation from the municipality? Okay. Thanks very much for that. And again, I do my best to open up. We've only got a few minutes left here. So with that, Edith, I'll hopefully the forced questions I've tried to squeeze out of you were reasonable for everybody. I sure appreciate everyone staying on to continue the discussions. And with that, Edith, I'll turn it back over to you. And thanks very much, folks, for having me in.